I love well-designed, challenging boss fights in video games. From Dark Souls series to Hollow Knight or even various raid bosses in World of Warcraft. I crave those thrilling fights where players have to overcome an increasingly harder encounters against massive monsters or shadowy figures. It's one of my favorite elements in gaming. Darksiders Genesis offers satisfying action-packed gameplay where isometric view can be used to add a layer of tactical movement and positioning into every encounter. Players can switch between two characters, nimble gunslinger Strife or a sturdier melee-focused war. I've recently made a delayed review about this title, so if you want to check it out, link is in the description. The game hosts numerous encounters against challenging foes. Every chapter has at least one boss fight. I want to look at them from the design perspective and find the hardest one, as I love a proper challenge. So I decided to have fun and ranked the boss encounters from easiest to hardest. Now, this is my ranking, so you might not agree with it. If that's the case, I highly encourage you to voice your opinion in the comment section. Anyways, I decided to rate the boss fight based mostly on their apocalyptic difficulty versions. Why? Because it doesn't matter if it's an early or last boss encounter. All of them are tuned up to the same power level, which makes it comparable. I also pay attention to overall boss design and combat complexity, the artistic value and how easily the fight can be cheesed. You see, both Strife and War have their ultimate ability, called Anarchy and Chaos form. I don't like this mechanic as it turns the horsemen into invincible hulking terrors dealing massive amount of damage, which can make the whole encounter obsolete. Still, it's an integral gameplay mechanic, so I'm going to take it into account while talking about bosses. Enemies which have their own chapter are gonna be scored a little bit higher, as player cannot grind enough meter to turn into chaos form immediately. So the right to cheese the fight has to be earned throughout the encounter. Also, I'm taking into account only fights with bosses or mini-bosses who have their HP bar shown at the bottom of the screen and grant a creature core, so no flux chamber. Okay, so with all of that being said, let's start the countdown. At number 16 we have the Blight Cannon. This could be barely considered a boss fight as the cannon is stationary and doesn't pose that much threat. Still, it grants a core after defeating, so it made the list. The boss's only attacks are its cannons rotating in circle, spewing toxic waste at straight lines in a very slow, clearly telegraphed manner. It's extremely easy to avoid it. Even the mobs appearing during this fight are the easiest, most basic creatures, posing very little threat. That's why this encounter lands at the bottom. It's boring, easy and simply quite bad. I've decided to count Slag Demon and Legion Siegemaster as the same encounter, simply because pretty much they are the same boss. Both Slag Demon and Siegemaster are dangerous only in close quarters. Their attacks are slow and clearly telegraphed, giving War time to either dodge or parry. If you are staying away playing as Strife, your only threat is the mid-grinder charge, which is easily avoidable. Its only saving grace is ability to change directions during the charge, but players can counter it by just simply dodging at the last moment. This enemy appears later in the game as a mini-boss, yet still doesn't pose any threat. I think that both Slag Demon and Legion Siegemaster suffer from being too basic. Firing up Chaos or Anarchy form feels like an overkill.
Not so troubling now.
Wasn't that hard? Legion Shieldbearer is Slag Demon's and Siegemaster's cousin. This is one of the last bosses, but it's just too simplistic, ending up being a weak encounter. Shieldbearer shots deal a massive amount of damage and can kill you if caught off guard. The problem is that the setup for shooting takes up so long that player can freely switch their position and then freely abuse the boss. So basic tip, wait for the boss to set up shooting position, move to the side and then attack. Shieldbearer's melee is also very weak as his attacks are very slow, and even when War constantly dishes damage towards this demon, he might try to set up his shooting stance, which opens up another window for free uninterrupted damage. Even if you are not prepared for the fight, the generous big waves of trash mobs before this encounter will let you fuel up your chaos meter before fighting with Shieldbearer. Molten Hound lands at 13th place. And you might ask, whoa, Molten Hound harder than Legion Shieldbearer? Really? Yeah, between the Hound and the Shieldbearer, but I decided that Molten Hound is going to land a little bit higher, mostly due to two reasons. His charge attacks cover more ground and are quite fast, posing more threat to Strife, and the other reason falls to regular playthrough. I know it's mostly about apocalyptic difficulty, but in close calls let me rely on the initial experiences. You see, during your first playthrough, there are no Chaos or Anarchy forms available for Molten Hound, so players are forced to actually beat this fire dog legitimately. In my opinion, this warrants a higher spot. What are Molten Hound weaknesses? Well, first, it's a reskin of a regular enemies found on the same level. This means that players should already had enough training in recognizing bosses' attack patterns. Hound's only additional ability is the Molten Breath, which is very punishable as it travels only in straight line in front of the boss, giving some free time to dish damage. For me, War does the job in here as attack patterns are easy to dodge. Strife might get caught in a pouncing attacks. Astarte is the first quote-unquote real boss on this list. What do I mean by that? Astarte has her own chapter dedicated to the encounter. It means that players cannot accumulate the chaos meter before the fight and have to get it up during boss fight. So this will automatically place this encounter higher on the list. And that might be its only saving grace. The fight is bad. It's overly long and the pacing doesn't work in Astarte's favor. On paper, the fight might seem interesting. The only encounter using horses is divided into phases where Astarte runs in circles, posing very little threat. The most reliable way to get her down is to follow her on horse as Strife and shoot at her. That's all. After her HP falls down to a certain level, she switches to the other phase, forcing players to move on foot. Astarte summons Nephilim brutes which have to be dealt with in order to advance the fight. The main difficulty during those phases are frantic and chaotic charging attacks which could happen off screen. It's hard to react properly. Last horse phase is when the shit gets real, as finally there are some trash mobs spawning during Astarte's circle running. Those are the corrupted angels, my most hated enemies as their arrow shots are pretty quick. Astarte also starts to run faster, making it impossible to keep up with her. Still, riding on horse should make avoiding arrows easier. If you find yourself being knocked off your horse, then that's the time to use your Anarchy form and DPS down Astarte when she gets close. Also a side note, only Strife is reliable during the horse phases. It's hard for War to keep up with the boss and I think it's a poor design, especially for co-op play. Greener is such a forgettable boss encounter. This is an aggressive boss with a very fast attacks dealing a lot of damage. He can chain them into a small combo. The problem is that the attack patterns are telegraphed in an obvious way. Also, when he starts his combo, he's locked into forward movement, so by sidestepping, player can punish Greener. This guy doesn't have a lot of attacks, so my best advice is to learn the few patterns and abuse them. He also isn't very tanky, so there is a possibility of cheesing the fight through Chaos or Anarchy forms. And sometimes he spawns when there are some enemies left from previous encounter, so make sure to kill them as the corrupted angels can make the fight a lot harder. Nephilim Vindicator precedes Greener fight, yet in my opinion this boss is a little bit harder. Not on her own though. The other enemies make this encounter more demanding. There are multiple angels and Nephilim brutes present here, creating such a perfect storm of bodies. Brutes are durable mid-bags, stopping many attacks while angels snipe the player. Nephilim Vindicator has two notable range attacks. The main rule is to keep moving. Triple shot is easy to avoid as it doesn't cover that much ground. She also likes to place an AoE damaging circle under players' feet. The battle plan here is simple. Keep moving, kill the angels first as they are the greatest threat, then you will slowly chip at the brutes. Vindicator alone is laughably easy. The other way of going about things is to fire up Chaos form at the start, killing all trash mobs and then calmly dealing with Nephilim Vindicator. Be careful not to burn both Chaos and Anarchy forms, as I'm not sure if there are enough trash enemies between this boss and Greener. Number 9. Stormcaller. This is a glass cannon boss. I really like it as it has really nice kit of abilities. Stormcaller decreases the player's field by conjuring damaging zones, usually more than one. This encounter tests players' awareness as Stormcaller throws deadly spears whenever Strife or War stays too far from the boss. Then there are also adds being constantly spawned, adding more chaos to the encounter. This boss deals a lot of damage, but its main flaw is squishiness. If you fire up both Anarchy and Chaos form, then you can burn most of Stormcaller's HP. Even without cheesy tactics, this guy melts really fast. The encounter would benefit from some sort of intermission phase where the boss can't be damaged, forcing players to think about their cooldown usage. It has potential, but ends up being a simple DPS race. Hollowfiend, the first boss of the game, ends up in the middle of my list. For the first boss encounter, it was such a promising fight. Decent range of attacks with wide melee sweep, strong range abilities like a straight line of consecutive explosions or chaotic fireball barrage. In my opinion, the most dangerous attack thanks to its unpredictability. Then the boss forces players to jump through damaging wave, summons adds to add a little bit of chaos and help replenish players' resources. It's really good. Hollowfiend is also quite sturdy, he's not a pushover. In his second phase, players have to remember that his melee sweep also summons a big fireball, which makes it dangerous both in melee and from range. This boss requires recognizing its attack patterns. It might be really hard for war players if they are not good at parrying. Playing a Strife requires a lot of dodging and it's fun. Really nice boss with a strong design. It's a shame that many later boss encounters underdeliver.
Okay.
Mammon is the first of the actual major bosses, so again there's no way to build up chaos meter before the fight. Mammon goes through different phases during the encounter. His attacks deal moderate damage. He also moves a lot, so Strife might be more reliable during this fight. What I really like design wise is the choice given to player. They can decide if they want to make the fight harder. By default you should destroy various artifacts summoned by Mammon, but if you crave some challenge, just let them be. Fight will get progressively harder this way. There is even an in-game challenge for doing exactly that. Those artifacts summoned by Mammon represent new encounter phases. Those are simply DPS checks. If players' DPS is too low, then they might get overwhelmed by enemies. So prioritize artifacts before going back to DPS the boss if you want to do the fight the easy way. Mammon constantly switching position can also neglect Chaos form, so better save it for the last phase as it's the most hectic. The demon summons every previously used artifact. This time players cannot DPS down the artifact, so threat is intensified. This is a simple burn phase. It would be hard if not for the fact that Chaos and Anarchy form are invulnerable. At 6th spot we have the Dreadwalker. This oversized skeleton gave me a lot of problems during my first playthrough, mostly because it hits like a truck. Dreadwalker is tanky, he also frequently uses his charge ability and his long range spear thrust. If you play as Strife, you need to worry not only about the charge. Ooh, one shot! This boss's spear can also be thrown, dealing stupid amounts of damage. On apocalyptic difficulty it can one-shot Strife. Melee attacks hit hard also. Fortunately War can parry the attacks, but still, if you miss time parry or dodge, then you are going to suffer. For me, the most reliable way of killing Dreadwalker was to kite him, while dealing with the adds. Then bait the range attacks and keep DPSing the boss. Just be ready for the charge and throw attacks. I decided to keep my Chaos and Anarchy form as my lifesavers. 5th spot belongs to Legion Boltspitter, one of the earliest bosses and the highest placed foe from all bosses where players can prepare Chaos meter before the fight. Legion Boltspitter is a headache. This demon is not complicated at all. He is just tanky, hits hard and reappears during the playthrough multiple times as a mini-boss. His Gatling gun barrage is hard to dodge as it follows player's character. Playing as Strife, I had to rely on terrain obstacles since just trying to strafe around the room guaranteed couple of hits on me. Then while switching to War, this boss appears to be extremely easy. One simple melee attack with slow, recognizable animation. So what's the problem? Legion Boltspitter is tanky to the point where there is enough time for player to make mistakes and each one of those mistakes hurts like hell. Having to dance around Boltspitter multiple times on various levels felt frustrating. This is why he lands so high. Belial is another one of the major bosses, with their own chapter devoted to them. In a similar vein to Mammon, this fight contains multiple phases. Belial close quarter attacks aren't that hard to dodge or parry, but I had continuous problems with his rotating strike. I just couldn't get the timing right. He also summons crystals empowering him. You can get rid of the crystals by using War's Glaive Toss, so if you prefer playing as Strife, keep in mind that some fast switches might be needed. When Belial becomes invulnerable and summons ghouls, which he then pulls to himself, this is the time for Strife. Static ammo deals wonderfully with all of the small targets. Important note here, Belial's phase switching makes him invulnerable for some time, so pay attention as to when you want to use your Chaos or Anarchy form. You don't want to waste it. Overall, this is a pretty nicely designed boss. Moloch is the final boss in Darksiders Genesis. He is characterized by his aggressive attack patterns mixed into combos, as well as creating crystals on the battlefield, effectively reducing players' movement options. First of all, Moloch's melee flurry of attacks can be parried. If you play as Strife, then I highly encourage you to use Charge Shot, as it goes through obstacles, notably the purple crystals. Also, don't fire up any cooldowns early. After taking about 10% damage, Moloch gets invulnerable for a while, which might waste your special abilities. Moloch takes number 3 spot because of his relentless wide arc attacks combined with the purple crystal shenanigans, but in my apocalyptic difficulty run he barely hit me. It was mostly due to spending an hour, maybe 2 hours practicing his attack patterns on casual difficulty in order to get the no damage achievement. I learned that his wide slash attacks have a safe spot behind the boss, so if like me you prefer dodging, dashing behind the boss does the trick. One of the crystal summoning abilities always leaves a safe spot in the middle of the arena. Moloch leaves enough space to dish out effective punishment. Still, he's one of the more difficult bosses in Darksiders Genesis. At number 2 we have Wicked Killington, the secret boss of the game, hiding behind trickster doors in the void. He uses fast combo attacks and frantically teleports around the platform. In second phase he throws a set of cards at the player, dealing a lot of damage. The best way to avoid card throw is to dash from right to left. I wouldn't call Wicked Killington's attack patterns particularly hard, but the damage, aggression and speed make this boss a strong enemy. Also, an important note. If you are not planning on going on apocalyptic difficulty, then Wicked Killington is a very special boss, as he doesn't scale with selected difficulty. He is by default scaled to somewhat apocalyptic power level, so for people not interested in grinding creature cores and getting the highest power values, this guide might be ranked on the first place as the hardest boss. In my opinion, he is just too simplistic. The first place goes to Dagon. Honestly, this is the only boss in Darksiders Genesis which I could call hard. Of course, chaos forms still undermine the fight, but you have to plan their usage and you need to earn the right to even use them. Dagon has a lot of HP. During the fight he constantly summons lightning strikes at players' locations. He spawns waves of adds and then gets invulnerable and summons a huge tidal wave. Tidal wave is a gimmick, but it somewhat resets the encounter. The biggest problem in here are the adds. When the orbs appear, the difficulty quickly scales up. If player is not careful, he can be overwhelmed, as orbs have decent HP and their projectiles not only hit hard, but are also really fast, so dodging them is troublesome. My general advice for this fight is to kill the adds, especially the orbs. If you find yourself overwhelmed, then that's the time for Chaos Form. Use it more as a defensive clear-up skill more than a damage ability. Another fun fact. At certain HP thresholds, Dagon goes invulnerable, which completely kills the momentum of Chaos Forms or offensive Wrath meter abilities like clones. I love it, as this is one of the few bosses who is designed to counter cheese tactics. I really think that without Chaos Forms, this could be a really tough, challenging encounter. It's the hardest one in the game and the only one which I truly consider to be worthy. To sum things up, Darksiders Genesis offers an interesting, visually impressive mix of bosses. Unfortunately, they end up being a little bit too simplistic to be memorable. The foundation is there, but the overpowered Chaos and Anarchy forms destroy most of the challenge. Darksiders Genesis ends up being barely above the middle point on the scale of worthy boss fight designs. Of course, that's only my opinion. Cheers!